naturopathic doctor, and he's going to talk to us about food for thought. And I've asked him to introduce himself and tell us what he'd like to know about him.
All right, so great. So my name is Dr. Curtis Kunkel, like was said there. I'm a board-certified naturopathic doctor. I specialize in adrenal and thyroid disorders and other endocrine disorders, but especially chronic, hard-to-treat conditions, especially things where people have gone from doctor to doctor, specialist to specialist, even naturopath to naturopath, looking for relief and for the answers, and they're just not finding it. And so those are the people that I tend to work with quite a bit. You know, I got into this a while back. A lot of my story really starts about 20 years ago when I was a young man. And I mean, I still pretty young in a way, but 20 years ago, I was just finishing up my collegiate degree, and I was an athlete in college, nationally ranked and all of that, and finished all that up and had a vehicle accident up in the middle of the woods, and ended up trying to walk all the way out of the mountains that night, which was 25 miles or so, after spending the whole day hiking, and made it out. But you know, I was trying to get to work, actually, because I fought fires in the summer times. So anyways, I had the connective tissue around my knees start going on me and becoming very inflamed and painful. And it got better, but then it would be re-aggravated, and you know, I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then I started having pain in my wrists and carpal tunnel-like things, and that progressed and would wax and wane, and it got to the point where I had heel spurs, and I was pretty immobile. I couldn't even walk very far, let alone stand for long, and I couldn't drive a vehicle for months on end, and so, you know, make do. So let alone I couldn't work. And I went to the doctors, the mainstream medical doctors, was prescribed medicines, medications, testing. Nobody could figure out what was going on. And, you know, they were doing the best that they could. But I ended up getting worse and worse, and actually responding very poorly to the medications in many cases, to the point where I felt like I was going to die on several occasions. And after going through enough of that, I was just like, that's it. I've pretty much taken this to its end for this situation, especially since I'm not getting the answers I'm looking for. And so I wasn't going to give up either. But since nobody else could tell me what was going on, I figured, well, I guess I have to figure it out for myself. And so I embarked on this journey and looked and ended up finding that diet and lifestyle and nutrition were so much more powerful than anything else that mainstream medicine could offer me. And as I started implementing more and more of those things, I started improving my health significantly. But I didn't really get to that point until one particularly low time in my life where I was still quite sick, you could say. And since I couldn't work much, I was trying to just scrape by, making ends meet, and that was primarily eating potatoes and pasta, not much else. And after several months of that, I noticed that my mental state was really starting to deteriorate. And once I realized that, I made that connection, I was just like, okay, this is definitely not acceptable. I'm a pretty cerebral kind of person, as you guys have probably come to see tonight. But yeah, I made that connection. I was like, okay, I am not scrimping here. I will go in debt I don't care how much, in order to put better food in my body so that I can maintain my mental emotional state. And I had that inkling that there was more than just the mental emotional state that would benefit. I was pretty sure that my body would benefit too, and yes, it did. But it's been a long journey. It's been many years, and there's a lot of learning here. This is a huge learning curve. This isn't something that we can just figure out or go to a conference and, oh, now I know, and we'll just implement it all right away, and all of a sudden our diet and lifestyle is all cleaned up and everything's good to go. It doesn't quite work that way, and the knowledge about diet and lifestyle is constantly evolving and changing, and we're rediscovering so much from our past, which we've forgotten and we've abandoned because, hey, this is the technological age, the information age. Everything's at our fingertips and everything's better, right? Not quite. And so, modern industrialism, the advent of the refrigerator, even modern farming, all of that has drastically changed the way that we eat. And science and all the chemicals that we're creating, it's like, what are those chemical commercials? It's life is better through science, or what, you guys have seen those. That we do benefit greatly, but there is a big price that we're paying also when we start applying this to our food production. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, but at any rate, I know that we're all seeking to feel better, have more joy, more energy, have a sharper mind, and perform better in our lives. I mean, this is what we all want. This is what I would say would define a good quality of life. And what is a long lifespan if we're not having a good quality of life? And this is what many of us are being faced with now more than ever before, because we have one of the longest lifespans that we've ever had in history. But now chronic disease is going exponential. All chronic diseases. And chronic diseases, they don't kill you really fast. They're chronic, they're slow, they take years. It's slow tissue breakdown. And it starts zapping our energy, our mental function, our mental emotional balance. It starts ruining our tissue slowly, and aches and pains settle in, and it brings a lot of suffering, low-grade suffering. And so many of us end up spending the last years of our lives, and sometimes the last decades, not having a very good quality of life. And it's really sad. And I think it's even sadder for me, because I know it doesn't have to be that way. I know that we can do something about it. But mainstream medicine isn't really, they haven't been taught any of this. And with mainstream medicine, they have three major tools that they've been taught. There's drugs, there's surgery, and there's radiation. Of course, there's a few other things, but those are the three primary tools that these doctors are taught. And physicians, they want to help people. They're not at fault here. They want to serve and help and ease the suffering of the planet. But they're plugging into a system that isn't really conducive to our health when it comes to chronic disease. The medical system that we have is a great system if it's an acute traumatic issue. Broken arm, broken leg, car accident, gunshot wound, something actually needs to be cut out now. That's where the system excels. But you cannot take those tools that are geared to that sort of system and apply it to chronic disease. It just doesn't work. And so all that ends up happening is that there's just the management of the symptoms. But the symptoms are not the disease. And I think this is something that a lot of us don't think about, or we don't connect sometimes. But let me repeat, the symptoms are not the disease. The symptoms are the symptoms of the disease, the expression of the disease. But we have to go below the symptoms and address the root issue in order to affect positive change. And when we do that, then guess what? The symptoms resolve themselves in many cases. And that's the beauty of natural medicine. And we all have that ability. The body wants to be healthy. And the body has the ability to heal itself as long as you give it what it needs. And it's essentially information that it needs. It needs the right information. So, at any rate, I can't remember if it was said that, but the name of this talk is Food for Thought. And I thought it was kind of a good little play on words because I wanted to provide everybody with something to think about, to ponder. Like I said, this is not a fast shift. My intent tonight is to inspire people. I don't want to create this environment where any guilt ends up being or settling in on any of us, because we all make decisions with what we put in our bodies that maybe aren't the best from time to time, and it changes, and it's all right. That's the thing. We don't need to get so hung up on food that we become like a food Nazi or something, where it's just so rigid that now we're stressed out about having some little piece of candy or something that's non-organic. It's like that's self-defeating when it gets to that point. And I see this occurring quite a bit in the natural community and with people that are trying to get better, but then they get so fixated on a certain approach dietarily that they end up shooting themselves in the foot as a result, and just working themselves up and dealing with more stress than they would need to. And we know that stress is at the root of all chronic disease. So we need to pay attention there, and food can be very therapeutic. So at any rate, I'm going to say some things tonight that may be somewhat charged, or may bring up some of our own emotional stuff, so to speak. And but I don't mean it from a judgmental perspective by any means. This is meant to inspire and to get people to just think a little bit more. So hence the food for thought. Also, that food is connected with our higher mind and our ability to become enlightened and to increase our consciousness. And I know this because I lived it. I went through all of that. That was part of my story. And so, going back, a little bit, I kept looking and looking and not finding. And so that's why I took it upon myself. And then I realized as I went further and further, because I was like, I am not going back to school for 4 more years or more. I've already done my share. And yet it kept slapping me upside the head, basically. It's like, no, that's what you're going to do, and you might as well, because you're not going to stop looking, and so you're spending all this time and energy doing that. You might as well help some other people while you're at it, and when you find what you end up finding that helps yourself. And so, I really enjoy this. I know that this is my calling, and I looked for a lot of years. So, all right. So, what is food exactly? What do you guys think?
Fuel.
Yeah,
Energy.
definitely energy. Yeah,
Nutrients.
medicine. Yes, nutrients. Yep. So yeah, food is all of that. what I think of as food is, or what I would like us to start thinking is that food is frequency, it's vibration, it's energy, you know, and everything in the universe is energy. And most of the energy in the universe, we can't even see it. It's beyond our realm of perception, but it's still there. And so the things that we can see and get our hands on, that's pure energy too. It's just condensed, you know, in a way that we can actually see it and feel it and sense it. But our senses are pretty narrow in the whole span of reality. So at any rate, food is energy, is frequency, vibration is information. And I want that to sink in a little bit. Have any of you guys ever thought about food in that way as information?
When I read the announcement for your event, I saw it on your description. So yes.
Yeah.
Vibrational packets of information.
Yeah.
Which makes me think of a seed planted in the earth that has this whole program in it.
Yeah, it's loaded with information. And that's a great analogy. So, you know, since food is energetic, you know, it makes sense that we would want to start paying attention to our food, how it's grown, how it's processed, what kind of food it is, and pay attention kind of like the way that we pick our friends in a way. You know, hopefully we don't like spending lots of time with total downer and depressed people or energy vampires or bullies or thieves, right?
Right.
That's not the type of people we want to hang out with. And so it should be also with our food, because there are things that are called food that it's quite challenging to actually put it in that category in many cases, because, you know, I mean, we're just programmed, we're taught to think that if it's in the grocery store or it's in the gas station or the convenience mart and it was made to eat, that it must be food, right? And that's not really the case, you know. And this is a big
Spray cheese.
yeah, and this is a big part of what's driving so much of our chronic disease in this day and age. Because, you know, you go back 100 or 200 years, do we have all of that stuff that we call food? No, we didn't. And, you know, our lifespans weren't as long back then either, but we were much more robust and vital as well. And, you know, the main thing that caused our lifespans to be shorter in the past was essentially lack of sanitation. That was the main key, was lack of sanitation. So we fixed most of that, and lifespans skyrocketed. And yet we're being led to believe that, well, it's actually medicine and antibiotics and all of these, you know, exotic treatments and whatnot, and revolutionary treatments. But, you know, I would counter that to some degree. And I'm not saying that these medicines aren't important, because they are. They definitely have their place. But many of them are being misappropriated and misused and overused, and that's creating a whole nother set of issues as far as our health is concerned. All right, so anyways, anything, you know, everything, all food is information. You know, so if we start thinking about food in that way, I think that we can start changing our relationship with food. We can start changing some of the choices that we make with the foods that we consume and the things that we choose to put into our bodies on a regular basis, because it is connected. It does make a difference. And so this information is encoded in the food that we eat as the complex patterns of nutrients, vitamins, minerals, macronutrients, phytonutrients. All of these things are packets of information. They're just loaded with all this information. And our body ends up essentially reading that information. It's like all the cells in our body, and our body as a whole is this processing, almost like a computer in some ways, because it's happening and we don't even know it. But it's reading all of that information. And as it reads that information, it ends up telling us on a level that most of us aren't aware of what our environment is like. And it informs us as to what is our environment. And so is our environment full of toxins? Is our environment full of sugar? Is our environment, does it have dirty water, or, is it, you guys kind of get the idea. It's testing and analyzing all of this information, and then it responds to that information accordingly. And so in this modern age where we have high fructose corn syrup on every corner, and it's just amazing how much sugar many of us consume anymore. And so when we put that sugar into us constantly, our cells are constantly reading that code, so to speak, and taking in that information, and they're responding accordingly. And this is why over 50% of us, I believe, at this point, have some sort of metabolic disease, essentially. And when I say metabolic disease, I mean, it's pre-diabetes or diabetes. Our metabolism is kind of, and our cells are kind of rebelling. They're actually trying to push the sugar away, and that's why they're becoming insulin resistant. And so, but this is the way the body is protecting itself. This is actually a longevity adaptation, and we just need to see it as such. But the cool thing is that we have total control over that. It's up to us. All right, so the other reason that food is so important is that it's like an extension of ourselves, because we take that food in. We've been programmed to think that food is just fuel in our engine, and that's it. Calories in equal calories out, right? That's what we've been taught. Doesn't matter the quality of the calorie. If it's a gram of sugar or a gram of protein, or both of those are about 4 calories per gram. It's like, oh, so 4 calories. Just make sure you don't go over your calories and you're good to go. Maybe low fat, you get the drift. So, but in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. There is so much information in this food, and so much different information in those calories that we put in our body, and that makes a huge difference. So anyways, food being an extension of ourselves, when we consume the food, we take that energy that is condensed into matter, we take it into our bodies, and we absorb and assimilate that which we need, or what we want to take in, what our bodies choose to take in. We absorb it, and it becomes us. And so where else do we get this tissue? We get it from what we put in our bodies. So it makes a lot of sense when you think about it that way, that, well, maybe if I'm full of aches and pains and the tissue's breaking down, maybe I could benefit a little bit by taking really good information in, and maybe my body would respond favorably to that. And in fact, it does. And that's the issue with our modern agricultural age and the way that our food is produced. It has been so altered that it's nothing like it used to be. We are eating nothing like what our ancestors ate even only 100 years ago. It's changed that much. All right, so the other thing is that if we don't get the appropriate information, our cells can no longer work, And then that ends up affecting our minds as well, and our level of consciousness, I believe, based on what I've seen and what I've experienced and what I see in my patients and in general in people. And you guys have probably seen that to some extent too. You know, you probably know certain people that maybe just eat junk food and sugar and candy and completely processed things all the time, and that's all they eat. And how do they live their lives? Are these really successful people? Are they bright and brilliant and caring? And, you know, usually not. You know, lots of times they're quite self-absorbed, they're out of touch, you know, they're maybe not the nicest people. They're stressed in many cases, and usually their health ends up breaking down much more quickly also. So anyways, with the right information, the right food, we have the potential to go further and to expand our consciousness, because it's all information, it's all energy. And in order to build ourselves, you know, I believe our body is a temple. It's the temple that we were given, and we need to essentially treat it with the respect that it deserves. And if we understood that, we would make many different choices. But we're not, because we haven't been educated. We haven't been taught to actually even think about these things. And a lot of this has to do with money. And I'll say that humans in general are the most valuable resource on the planet when it comes to multinational corporations and corporations in general. There are dollar signs above every single one of your heads. And they are looking to tap that resource any chance they can get. And so, is there very much money in a healthy person? No, not at all. Because a healthy person is not going to go to the hospital, is not going to go to the doctor, is not going to take drugs, is not going to need surgery or radiation or any of those things that cost thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars per person. A healthy person is not going to do that. And so we need to start thinking about that in a little bit different way, you know, and realize that, hey, we are a valuable resource, and maybe if we want to live the life that we know we were meant to live, that we need to take a little more responsibility and not believe everything that we've been told from some supposed authority, right? Because this happens a lot. And unfortunately, the medical system is rife with this, because doctors have always, you know, been God, essentially, taken on that role. And it's, you don't question your doctor, you do what your doctor says. And, you know, and most doctors mean well. But again, they weren't educated with this knowledge. They weren't taught nutrition hardly at all.
One class.
Yeah, one class.
One class, it's elective.
Yeah, and many of them don't even get one credit. They get like one day of 1 week during their 4-year schooling, and they talk about nutrition a little bit.
Yeah, they know what the word is.
Yeah, but when you ask them to help me out with that, they have no idea, and this is why I guess the nutritionists exist, but the nutritionists are also under the thumb of big money, and a lot of this has to do with what our main food crops are. What are they?
Wheat.
Corn, soy, wheat,
Rice.
yeah,
Dairy.
So these producers are the big money producers in the world, especially in this country. And there's lots of lobbying they do, the sugar industry, sugar beets, all of that. There's tons and tons of money here.
And they get more welfare than human beings do.
Yeah, yeah. And they get paid to not even plant their fields.
Exactly.
And it's like, what? And then the fast food chains actually get write-offs so they can make that fast food cheaper and cheaper, so that people if they're on a limited income and they want to eat and feel satiated, you know, on a kind of a twisted way, they gravitate to these fast food restaurants where they can get a hamburger for $1. And it's like, really, did that hamburger only truly cost $1? I don't think so. Yeah,
Yeah, but the costs to the environment and
right. And the cost to us.
Taxpayers.
Now, the connections go deep because the pharmaceutical interests are many of the same interests as the agro-business interests, as the medical industry interests. They're all essentially owned by the same groups. And so if they end up making money on this faux food, so to speak, which will make us sick, then we will have to go take their drugs and go into the medical system. You know? So it's all connected. It's a very, very well planned out, well thought out, well executed business, essentially. Yeah.
I just have to confirm what you're saying because I never go to the doctor and I never go to the hospital. And I was required to get a local doctor for my supplemental insurance plan in order to have it. You have to have a primary doctor. So I went and chose one and went to her, and I said, I don't take any of your tests. I don't want your pap smear. I don't want your, mammogram, nothing. I just want your name in case I have to come and use you. She said, well, you might want to pick a different doctor. Because she knows that I'm not going to come in.
Yeah.
And it's so sad because my insurance company required that I get a doctor.
So this is the paradigm that we're under,
Yeah.
because the insurance companies are all in this as well. It's part of the same interest. So at any rate, and if you don't mind, I want to hopefully have enough time to get through my talk, and we can talk about lots of things after this. But at any rate, another point that I want to make though is that our medical industry in this country alone is a $3 trillion a year industry. That is a massive, massive amount of the GDP of this country. And when you compare it to the GDP of all other countries on the planet, and I'm not talking the medical industries of those countries, I'm talking the entire gross domestic product of those countries, our medical industry is, I think it's like the 5th or the 6th largest economy on the planet. That is how much money we are sinking into medicine in this country. That is a lot of money. And yet, what is it doing for us? Americans have some of the worst health of all of the industrialized nations. We were ranked at the bottom for infant mortality. And we have more babies die in this country than almost all other industrialized nations. And yet, we spend so many trillions on this. So something's not working, right? We need to think a little bit differently. But from a business standpoint, this is an awesome business. And all of you are the resources that are fueling this business. So we have to take our power back.
Not really.
Essentially. Yeah. So those of us that are healthy are not fueling it. And I want to see more people healthy. That's why I'm doing this. I'm on my own journey to regain that, and I have in very large part, and I want to share this with other people that want this information. All right, so anyways, you guys have heard the debate about environment versus genetics, right? And the debate isn't raging so much anymore because recently they kind of realized, okay, it's a little bit of both, and they've called a truce to some extent. But I'm sure many of you are aware that there are all these genetics tests just being rolled out all the time. 23andMe is a really big one that's quite common, but there's all these medical genetics tests as well. And some of them are very valuable. Many of them can be useful, but I think a lot of them are being overused because we're not understanding what is really going on here. And before all of this, we used to think, oh, my genetics are bad. My parents got heart disease or cancer, and their parents got heart disease or cancer or diabetes, and it's gone all the way back through my family, so I know I'm going to get it too, and I know I have those genes. Well, you probably do have those genes, but that doesn't mean you're going to get it, because you have so much control over that. I will say, based on what I've come to understand, that environment dictates over 90% of the time whether or not you get the disease, regardless if you have the genes or not. Your genetics account for less than 10%. Now that is really good news, right? That means that we have the power. We get to choose, but we have to inform ourselves. We have to educate ourselves so that we know how to wield these tools that can keep us healthy or help us regain our health. And so the good news about this is that therefore then when we find out, oh, we have those bad genes, it's like it's not a death sentence anymore. As long as we take the responsibility to do something about it. Because we can live a long, happy, healthy life even with those genes. So, the analogy I use is a loaded gun. A loaded gun, that's the genes, the bad genes. But does a loaded gun just start shooting and going off everywhere all by itself? No, not at all. Something has to pull the trigger in order to make that gun go off. And it's the environment. That's why I'm saying the environment is over 90% responsible. Because a loaded gun, if nothing ever pulls the trigger, it'll never go off in a million years. So, but if you take a loaded gun and put it on your coffee table, and you've got a bunch of little kids in the house that don't know any better, that's a bad environment, right? Those genes are going to express themselves. You take the loaded gun, you put it in the safe, lock it, nobody else has the key or the combination. It's not going to go off. That is a really good environment for a loaded gun. So that's what our environment is to us as well. And we just have to put ourselves in the right environment to augment our genes. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. So, I talked a little bit about what I believe our body is. I believe it's the temple that we were given that houses our soul. I happen to believe that we have a soul. And I hope most of you guys think that there's something a little more than just our body going on here. So our soul, I believe, ends up coming in, and it's kind of like, this is our car, so to speak. And we get to drive this car around, in this lifetime and enjoy it and use it and do everything that we came here to do. And, but we have to take care of it, right? If we want to do a lot, if we want to have a nice, fruitful lifetime that's enjoyable, pain-free, we don't want to be ramming our car into every wall that we go by, running over street signs, smashing into trees, not changing our oil. It's like, this car is not going to last long. But if we take care of it, if we read our owner's manual and we pay attention, then we can start learning how to drive our car, and we can become very effective, and we can even learn how to maybe race our car and not wreck and do amazing things with this vehicle that we've been given, and have a nice long lifetime that is a pleasure to live. I mean, doesn't that sound good to everybody? I mean, that's what I'm shooting for. I've already been about 95 years old in the past in this body, and I just keep getting younger all the time. So I'm going backwards. I've kind of lived a reverse life in some respects, and hopefully I can share some of what I've learned in the process. All right, so we are massive complex systems, like I was saying, and I come back to this information aspect again. This food is information, and if we don't get the right information, how can our body have the information to do what it's supposed to do? It can't, right? It will break down prematurely if that's the case. So, all right, how long have we gone?
An hour.
Okay, I'm
Would you
getting
like me to
close.
get you one?
Would you please? Thank you. I'm sorry, I got a little tickle. Must have been something I ate.
All right, so
Oh, thank you.
Something down there.
we have a microbiome as well that lots of us, hopefully we're starting to think about more. We have about 100 trillion cells that make up our body. That is an unfathomable amount of cells, right? The number of cells in our body. Well, guess what? We have at least 1 to 2 quadrillion. Have you guys even heard that number before? At least 1 to 2 quadrillion bacteria in and on our body. That is mind-blowing. And these bacteria, they actually, when you look at the genes and the genetic information that is in our body, and then you look at the genes and the genetic information that is in bacteria, their genetic information outnumbers ours by a factor of 100 to 1. That is a lot of information compared to how complex we think we are. And so what have we done with antibiotics? We have annihilated our bacteria, which we need in order to be healthy. Our bacteria help digest our food and make vitamins and allow us to assimilate what we've eaten much more effectively. And when we take antibiotics, it's like dropping a nuclear warhead down there, especially when we do it over and over and over again. And so, it's not the end of the world, but lots of people do respond very poorly after just one round of antibiotics, and they can develop diseases from that. So always make sure you have a good probiotic on hand, because there are times and places for antibiotics. They are meant to save lives, and they do save lives. But when they're overused, they end up contributing to chronic disease. And they annihilate our microflora, they annihilate many of our species, they annihilate all of that genetic code, all of that information. And we need information in order to be adaptable and to adjust to our environment and to have the flexibility to be healthy. That's what health is to have flexibility, and we need information to be flexible. And if we keep getting rid of all of our information, whether it be our microbiome or the types of foods that we eat, then we are going to find ourselves less and less healthy. All right, so what makes the body sick, really? Like I said, it's a lack of information, essentially, but where is this coming from? At the foundation of all disease is inflammation. And so you will always find that, no matter what disease you're looking at. If you have any aches or pains, that's inflammation. And if you could reverse that inflammation, the aches and pains would greatly resolve or relieve or go away. Tissue damage, that's definitely inflammation. Cancer is inflammation. Diabetes is inflammation. All of it. And so when we start thinking about it in that way, then we can start understanding a lot more about what is really driving disease. All right, so, one point I'd like to make is, I kind of touched on, our consciousness and our ability to expand our consciousness and develop our mental emotional health. And that is definitely the truth, because You look at our penal system, our prison system, it's just loaded with people. And now our youth are becoming more and more deviant, and ADHD all over the place, and mental emotional balance is leaving us in large part. And you know what this is? This is a lack of information. This is a lack of health. This is inflammation being driven by not having the information or having the wrong information. And when I say the wrong information, that's toxins, chemicals, heavy metals, and inappropriate doses. All of those things drive inflammation, because this is information we don't want in our body, and now we have to deal with it. So people that are engaging in deviant activity, or are depressed or bipolar, or angry and abusive to other people, ADHD, all of that stuff, these people are usually not eating well. They're not getting the information their bodies need, and if they were to change their diets, so much of that behavior just melts away. And I've seen it over and over in my practice. So this is the way the body works. And if we just knew that and practiced it, we would make that connection. We'd be like, wow, let's eat the good stuff. But this is where I'm saying the multinational corporations don't want us to realize that. So how do they make the food pyramid?
Upside down.
Yeah. Grains and starches and carbohydrates are the foundation. Well, that's where the biggest money is, in agriculture. So that's why the food pyramid is designed that way. And yet that is driving so much inflammation. And it's driving so much mental, emotional aberration. It's driving criminal behavior all over the place. You know, so many of these criminals, many of them aren't bad people. If they just ate better, they would never have done what they did in the first place that got them in prison. One last thing I want to talk about with the microbiome, and I'll leave that, is that lots of us get cravings, right?
Yes.
Especially for junk food and things that we know aren't so good for us. Well, guess what? Many of those cravings are not our cravings. There are gut bugs talking to us, sending chemical messengers out into our bloodstream. Information, code, sent out into our bloodstream that circulates and goes to our hypothalamus and our central brain control centers, telling us, you need that ice cream, you need that milk chocolate bar, you need all of that drink, that cola, whatever it is. Those are aberrant messages that are coming from the gut bugs that aren't so beneficial for us. And this is why when you change your diet, oftentimes your cravings can get even worse when you try to make your diet better. But if you can tough it out for long enough, it's those bad bugs dying. And they're like giving it all in their dying throes, feed me. And if you don't feed them, they die and leave. And now all of a sudden, those cravings aren't as strong as they used to be. And this happens all the time. So if you can just get through that period, then you can start receiving better messages from down here, and that will greatly reduce your overall inflammation as well. All right, so how do we become healthy and increase our consciousness? It's really quite easy. We have to look at our environment. And our environment is not only made up of our food, which is one of the main focuses in this talk, but it's also made up of our sleep patterns, our quality of sleep. Are we getting enough exercise or movement in our life? Do we have good people that we get to hang out with in our lives? Are we drinking good water? Are we drinking enough water? Are we breathing deeply enough? Are we doing something meaningful? Are we laughing and having fun enough? All of those things are what make up our environment. And like I said, those account for over 90% of our health, or whether or not we are healthy. So we have the control in our hands. We just have to learn about this. We have to learn why it's important. So coming back to food, we don't want to eat processed, refined, genetically modified foods. That's kind of the crux of a lot of it. This is what I teach my patients. And this is why this is a long, slow process. And it is a little more expensive in some cases, but when you start making the connections, you start realizing that it's actually much less expensive in the long term, because you're going to prevent the pain and the suffering and the medical bills that will plague you if you don't pay attention to the quality of the information that you're putting in your body. A well-informed body is a healthy body. So this is why I always propose organic whenever possible, because if it's organic, then it's not GMO, it hasn't been sprayed with chemicals, fertilizers, and pesticides and herbicides. So all of those things are the wrong kind of information that cause inflammation. And that increases the burden on the body and ends up making it more difficult for us to find homeostasis, again, in health. So it's best to just keep that stuff out, and that frees up energy so that we can think more clearly, have the energy to repair our DNA and our cellular tissue and feel good. And the reason we want to stay away from GMOs, you guys are all familiar with GMOs, genetically modified organisms? Well, GMOs have had their DNA altered, and your DNA is information. So they've had their information altered. And that altering has injected the genes and information from other organisms into these new organisms. And so we've genetically modified corn, soybeans, cotton, canola. We've even got genetically modified Atlantic salmon now. That's really scary. So GMO sugar beets, there's tomatoes, there's so many things, papayas that are GMO. So we need to pay attention to those things because we want good, whole information here, that our bodies know how to use and deal with. And so some of the genetically modified information is what's called the Bt toxin. And Bt toxin is an insecticide that it was brought from a bacteria, and it was brought into the code of corn and soybeans and things like that. And so that when the corn and those plants grow, they actually make Bt toxin in every cell of the plant. And so when a grasshopper comes along and starts munching on a leaf, it's eating Bt toxin, which is an insecticide, and goes down and ruptures the intestinal tract of that insect, blows it open, and the insect dies. That's how that insecticide works. So we're eating that same food that is loaded in Bt toxin. And so what do you guys think happens to us when we eat that? It's damaging our intestinal lining. And I know many of you guys have heard of leaky gut. It's kind of a trending term, especially in the naturopathic community, but it's real. There's definitely increased gut permeability. And so a lot of it is being placed on gluten, right? We've all heard, people are gluten sensitive or have a gluten allergy. Well, gluten is a very difficult to digest protein, and many of us do have some trouble with that. But when you combine gluten with Bt toxin and with glyphosate is Roundup. That's why they've made it genetically modified so that the plant can withstand being sprayed with Roundup and not die. And that glyphosate that is Roundup, you know what it was initially designed as? An antibiotic. That was one of the initial uses of glyphosate and Roundup, was as an antibiotic. And we're spraying it by the ton all over the world. And we need those bacteria in the soil so that the plants can be healthy so that we can get the vitamins and nutrients out of them. And yet we're spraying antibiotic over everything. And so that is affecting us there. And we're spraying antibiotic on the plants that we're eating. So we're getting a bunch of glyphosate in the food that we're ingesting. And that's killing our gut bugs. And that's also leading to our gluten sensitivity and intolerances, along with the Bt toxin that starts punching holes in our gut and making us even more sensitive to things like gluten and whatnot. And this is why lots of people can go to Europe where they don't use lots of GMOs or banned in many European countries, and they don't use those chemicals. And somebody's like, oh, I have gluten sensitivity, but I go over there and I ate the bread and I was fine. I must be cured. Thank God for vacations. But then they come back and they eat the bread, and first half of a slice, they're on their butts with all the same old symptoms. And this is why I'm saying that it goes way beyond the gluten for many of us, but we're not connecting the dots quite yet. So this has to do with the information with our gut microbiome, with the information in the ecosystem and our fields and all of that. And so this is why we have to pay attention to this, you know, and we need to eat better foods. And this is why organic can bypass much of this. All right, so whole foods contain the whole set of information. When we process and refine the foods and pull them out, we're separating the information, we're chewing the information up, we're reducing the information, and then we put that in our body doesn't have all the information that it would have had otherwise, and now it can't do as much. And now we become more susceptible to imbalances. So, you know, the last thing I want to talk about, and then the talk will be over, is water. And this is where blessing our food comes in. Being thankful for our food, so important. You know, and I believe it's because water is the universal solvent, right? It dissolves everything within it. And since everything is information and energy, it takes it in and it holds that information and it can transmit that information. And what percentage of our bodies is water? Yeah, about 70%. What's the percentage of the planet that's covered in water? Yeah, it's about 70%. As above, so below. So, isn't that amazing? So anyways, this water, you guys have heard of Masaru Emoto and his work with water? And he did all those experiments where by projecting thoughts into the water and then freezing it, if you projected loving, energetic, good thoughts, the crystals that formed were brilliant and geometrically designed, beautiful. And if you projected negative, down, you know, bad thoughts, then they just clumped and they didn't create that nice geometric pattern. Our thoughts can do that. It has an impact. This is on water. Our bodies are 70% water. Do you think it might have something to do with how healthy we are as well? That information that can be transferred? Yes, definitely. Have you guys heard of homeopathy? Yeah, I love homeopathy. Well, do you guys know how homeopathic medicines are made? So you take the original substance, make it into a tincture, and then you pour a little bit into some water and you succuss it. You know, you kind of just beat it up, and that ends up taking the original substance and transmitting its information through the water. And then you pour most of it out and you dilute it with a bunch more water and you do it again. You do this tens, hundreds, thousands of times depending on the potency of the remedy. You do it so much that most homeopathic remedies don't even have one molecule of the original material left behind. And yet, what they've done is they've transferred the information of the original material through the water and then that becomes the medicine, and it affects all the water in us and changes our energetics, and we respond amazingly if the right remedy is picked, because we're all unique. So anyways, this is why water is so important. You know, it is the major transfer and holder of information. You know, and even look at the ocean. The ocean is where everything flows back to. All of the minerals on the planet, all the information eventually ends up back in the ocean. You know, and that's our biggest body of water there. So it is with our own body as well. So anyways, when we eat poor quality foods, most healthy foods have a lot of water in them. Look at our vegetables and our fruits, even flesh. We're 70% water, so the animal protein we eat is roughly 70% water. So it's mostly water. When we eat poor quality foods, that water is not structured. High quality fresh foods, the water is structured in those foods. Now, if we're eating structured water, we don't have to structure it. It's already structured. We can then just use it. But if we eat foods that have unstructured, tangled, water in it, that is lacking information, is lacking energy, then guess what? We have to put the energy into that water, and we have to restructure it ourselves. And that takes a lot of energy to do that. And that's why we feel run down and fatigued in many cases. And then we can't rebuild our tissues as well. And we start aging faster. And so this is why good whole food is so important. So anyways, I hope that this talk was stimulating. I hope it opened your minds a little bit. I hope you're going to think about your relationship with food from this point on, and start embarking on maybe making some little changes. And don't try to do too much too fast. Be easy on yourself. Love yourself. Give yourself permission to make mistakes and have trial and error and do all of that. But it's so important. And so anyways, I hope that with this you can truly start tapping into your potential, your true potential. We all have so much more potential than we are really tapping into. And the world, I know, could be so much better of a place if we really achieved our true purposes. And so many of us, I think, die without achieving what we really came here for. And I want to see the world, I want to see it change. I want to see it change for the better. I want to see it improve. And it's not going to improve from the top down. Never will. It is only going to improve from the bottom up. And that's us. We are the change. So I hope that this inspired you, and I just feel really blessed to be able to give this presentation to you guys, and I hope you're able to do something wonderful with it. So I'll hang out, answer questions, whatever you guys would like to ask. So thank you.
There's so much disagreement among nutritional experts.
Oh yes.
How does one wade through that?
That's why I generally recommend that people do a lot of their own research. And I know it's difficult because we're all living very busy lives, but we have to carve some time out if this is really important to us and inform ourselves. And guess what? We have the internet now. There is so much information out there.
Conflicting information.
Yeah, but the good information is there. So we have to learn how to see the good information and filter the bad information.
Can you give us some guidelines for that?
I do the filtering.
Well, we all need to do the filtering, and that's discernment, really. And that's unfortunate because our school system is not teaching rational thinking anymore.
Yeah,
We're just pumping out automatons.
yeah.
But you should mention, tapping into your own energy. However way, I do the old finger test, and just with everything, just about. So and I also, I do that as a double check a lot, because I'll just get an intuitive hit instantly, and sometimes you just don't trust yourself. I do the old finger testing, but there's arm kinesiology. There's also my heart will be open if it's something good, or it'll just feel closed. I'll get goosebumps. I'm getting goosebumps now, so I'm supposed to be giving you, talking about this. So there are some people's fingers tingle. Do you guys all have some little something that you just tap into the collective consciousness or whatever it is to get your information? That's really helpful. I do that with, that looks pretty good. I don't know what's in it. Is it good for me? Oh, darn.
And lots of
Yes,
us,
it is.
lots of us do have this ability. We all have the ability to tap into that. But some of us, it's much easier than it is for others of us. And some of us are much more left-brained, let's say. And so for those, then you develop a little more rational thinking, and you learn how to sift through the information, the scientific studies, the abstracts, and you learn some of that, or you find other people that are providing information, and you keep looking until you find people that you can trust mostly. But yes, there's so much conflicting information, and there's nobody out there that knows it all and that knows all the right stuff. So you just have to start building your own knowledge base as well, but definitely working with somebody that is quite knowledgeable is very beneficial. So I'm sorry, who was first?
What's a good probiotic? How do you tell? Are these gummies okay or not? No, I don't think so. Too much sugar, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of the issue, and probiotic research is still in its infancy, because our understanding of the microbiome is just going exponential every day. We still know so little. We put a lot of work into deciphering the human genome. Remember all that work that was going on to figure out all the genes? Well, guess what? The number of genes keeps decreasing by thousands every year or two. They're like, oh, well, we have to reassess that. But then they realize, oh, and actually it's not like this disease for this gene. It doesn't work that way, we found out. There's this thing called epigenetics, where the environment turns on and off many of our genes, which then causes us to express disease. And if the environment influenced us in a certain way that turned on or off certain genes, and then we have a child, we pass on the changed gene, setup to them. But anyways, we realized that genes aren't what we thought they were in us. And it was very disappointing.
So is the
to our
good
scientists.
old kefir, is
So-
kefir good then?
Anyways, what I was going to say though is that we've moved on to looking at the microbiome and the genetics there, because that's really where most of the secrets are for much of our health and our dietary needs. So yes, fermented foods are one of the best things you can consume.
Sauerkraut.
Yep.
Tempeh.
But
Kimchi.
there's a
Kimchi.
difference. There's a difference in sauerkraut, because most sauerkraut anymore is conventional.
Yeah,
It's just been
canned.
canned in vinegar. That's not true sauerkraut. That's not fermented. We need
Yeah.
fermented
Fermented.
foods. Yes.
Sourdough things. Do a sourdough starter. Sourdough your bread. Don't just use the starter, but sourdough the
Are you guys
Wheat
familiar with
loaves are
sourdough?
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this is how all bread was made up until about 100 years ago or so. It was all sourdough. It was all fermented. our ancestors knew so much about the food they ate. They knew they needed to break it down in order to digest it better. And now we're in the quick, fast technological age. We don't have time for that. Let's just spray the wheat with glyphosate to actually kill it right then and there. Because if we kill it, it dies and it dries out within a few days. Then we can harvest it real fast, grind it into wheat, bake bread within the day. That's fast, that's progress.
That's full of glyphosate.
Right?
And it's full of glyphosate. And it's not fermented at all. So we didn't break down all of those anti-nutrients and those phytates and the hard to digest, outer covering of those grains, those seeds. And that is causing irritation and damage to our digestive tracts. And when you combine it with the GMO components and the chemicals, yeah, it's quite a cocktail, and which is really leading to many of our issues.
To get the fermented food started, you have to start your own in your kitchen, basically.
Yeah, and it's really easy to do. It's
Can you tell us basically how to do it?
You have to get it started.
you can
No,
either
you don't have to get a starter.
you
No. we do sourdough start. We do all of our own starting.
Oh, good.
so there's
How
yeast
do you do
there's
So
that?
you've
yeast
got a recipe you can send out to all of us?
Well, for kraut, take a head of cabbage, chop it up, squeeze it, smash it till it gets juicy. Add 3 teaspoons of salt. Stuff it in a jar. Put on a lid loose. That's it. And
just keep it under
Yeah,
the level of the
yeah.
water.
so there's your kraut.
Keep
and-
it cold or warm
No,
just
on
in
your
your-
counter, because
on your counter.
Yes.
Or under your counter for slower,
So-
cooler. Yeah.
the temperature you want to ferment at is roughly 70 degrees, but it'll work down to 65 and up to 80 quite easily.
Okay.
And so it's usually out on your counter. And we have yeast floating around our environment, in our homes, outside. There is so much yeast everywhere. That's the yeast that ferments all of our foods. So these are wild fermentations, but wild fermentations are very healthy because that's the yeast in your environment. And if you eat the food that's made from the yeast in your environment, now you're getting the right information. You're getting connected, and that helps a lot. But even if you don't make your own fermented foods, it is much better to get a fermented food that might have been made somewhere else, because you're getting the live, bacteria and the live yeasts in those foods.
Can you tell us one more time? You take your cabbage.
And you can do any vegetable. So sometimes we just do vegetable sticks, stuff them in a jar with salty water, and put them in the counter. So then you have your, what do you call that? Oh, what is it? Giardina.
Gardenera.
Gardenaria or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just like some chopped up vegetables, and you just ferment that. This is the way our ancestors did it. This is what we did before we had refrigerators. Because if you ferment food, it keeps for weeks and months
Yeah.
without being refrigerated.
One time I had great little cherry tomatoes, these huge plants, and the frost was coming really soon, and they just weren't ripening. I just had bins of them, so I just cut them in half, put them in a jar with salty water. I put some dill with some garlic with some, and they tasted like green olives. They were so good.
Wow.
But you can add all your herbs, all your spices, ginger. I do a lot of curry, ginger, kraut. Just turmeric is awesome. Fresh turmeric, powdered herbs, fresh herbs. Really doesn't matter. I mean, you just put in whatever you have, whatever you want.
How do you do the sourdough starter?
You
So-
do that one, yeah.
Let's talk about.
Oh.
Or does everybody want to hear about sourdough starter? Because I know there was other questions, and I don't want to leave anybody out here.
Well, just send us your recipe.
So
Send it to Dottie. She can
Yeah, I'll
send it out
send it
to
out.
us.
I never have time to send out
Well,
recipes.
give it to Dottie. She'll send it out to all of us.
Actually, a really good book.
That's what
Sandor Katz.
yeah,
Sandor Katz, just wild fermentation.
yeah. So actually,
He's excellent.
if you
And he
guys
has
have
tons
something
of-
to write
yeah.
this down, Wild Fermentation
Okay.
by Sandor Katz. That's Katz.
Okay.
That is an excellent book,
Okay.
and
And he has all kinds of fermenting in there.
tons and tons of do-it-yourself wild fermented foods.
Great.
So
So the first name.
Sandor, Sandor, I believe.
Okay.
All right,
So who else
so
had a
That's a
question?
question.
yeah,
Back to water for a moment. It wasn't clear to me whether you were saying that it's better to drink more of our water from fruits and vegetables, or whether it's just better to drink more water, period, or...
both. Most of us are chronically dehydrated, and we don't realize it. So, and most of us don't eat enough fruits and vegetables either, which is a great source for good structured water. But we need to be getting more of that, and we need to be drinking more good, clean water. And, so we don't want certain things added to our water, such as fluoride. And do you guys add fluoride up here?
It's everywhere.
It is everywhere except for Portland. Portland's the biggest city in North America, I believe.
It's not fluoridated?
It's not.
They voted
It's
it out.
chlorinated. It's just not fluorinated.
Yeah.
And we have to keep voting it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so fluoride is toxic to the thyroid, and anything that's toxic to the thyroid will take down metabolism and take down mental function. So you become doled out if you get too much fluoride in your system. And they've done plenty of studies where they've shown that you give children a very small amount of fluoride, even 1 part per million, which is what they put in municipal water supplies, and it shows that the IQ points drop significantly, very measurably. And it also is driving many, many cases of hypothyroidism that are going undiagnosed. So, yeah, get the fluoride out. If you have fluoride in your water, get a fluoride filter. And a fluoride filter is a 2-part filter, because the normal charcoal filters do not take fluoride out. They take chlorine out, which is really good to get out of your water too, but you need the second one to get the fluoride. So, and
Where do you
it's worth
find
it.
that?
You can find those online, but if you just do an online search, for fluoride filter, you'll find plenty of places that offer them, and if it's a true fluoride filter, it'll have a dual filtration system.
So who else has a question? Paul, Dan.
Have you heard of Kangen water?
Yeah, I have.
What's your impression of?
I feel
What
like
is it?
it's a bit overpriced.
Yeah.
And I think that has to do with the business structure.
No, it doesn't.
Of
I'm a Kangen water person. It doesn't have. It's a medical machine. It's recognized in 3 countries.
yeah,
it's in
it
several
is.
hospitals.
It is definitely recognized.
So aside from the overprices, does it produce a
Yeah,
quality?
it has good health promoting effects.
What is it?
Kangen water, it's an alkaline water, but a lot of what isn't mentioned is that it's actually high in hydrogen. And hydrogen is a very potent antioxidant. And that's probably one of the biggest health promoting aspects of those ionizing water machines. It's not necessarily the pH, but the pH can be beneficial as well. But our body is designed to maintain a very strict, narrow pH value. And if it's too low, it's too acidic, we will develop disease. But if it's too alkaline, we'll also develop disease. Now, the reason that most people get lots of benefits from these alkaline water machines is that our diet is very acid forming. And these water machines make alkaline water, so it gets our pH back closer to zero, back closer to neutral, and the closer we are to neutral, the closer we are to health. And so, but I have seen people that have gotten themselves in trouble after a year or several years. If they're really consuming a lot, some people can actually overshoot and end up becoming too alkaline and develop many health issues as a result. So, there's a little bit of a balance that has to be achieved there, and it's usually good to have some guidance depending, but you definitely want to listen to your body. You guys are the captains of your ships, and you know how to drive them better than anybody, and you know what's going on. You get to feel it, so you're the ones that have to really pay attention. And so, yeah.
So what's your take on nutritional supplements, and in particular multivitamins?
I think there's definitely a place for them. I use a lot of them. What I didn't mention in the talk is that they're a refined form. So the information in them is not in a whole food form generally. And so it's somewhat incomplete, and so you don't absorb as much out of them as you would if you got that from your food. But because our food is so devoid of vitamins and minerals anymore, we need to augment it, and this is why it's always best to take your vitamins and supplements with food, because you're combining that information with food, with all that information, and now your body has a greater chance to utilize more of those vitamins and minerals. And
Should you recommend your people do multivitamins?
yeah, I do put a lot of them on that because there was a congressional hearing that was held some years back. It was that important of a meeting where the members of Congress were told, hey, we're in big trouble. Our soils are so devoid of nutrients that it's nothing like it used to be, and if this continues, we're all in big trouble. And do you know what year that was?
1947?
That's close. I believe it was 1936.
Oh my God.
And since then, we really went industrial.
Right.
So,
So
yeah.
I've cut back on multivitamins I'm doing it like once or twice a week rather than every day because of the recent very large population studies that it increased morbidity if people did daily multivitamins.
Now you have to be careful because the thing is that there are an exponential number or range of quality when it comes to nutritional supplements.
Right.
And there are supplements near the bottom of the list that are actually more detrimental for your health to take than not taking anything at all. That's how bad they are. And that's because of the binders and the additives that are added to those products. There are toxic things that are added to many supplements. And so at the other end of the spectrum are very clean, very high quality, many cases no additives added, no flow agents or binders or anything. That's the other end of the spectrum. Those are much more beneficial. And as long as they're used appropriately, you will
So
likely
how do you
get.
tell the difference? Price?
Often price has a lot to go into it. The cheapest ones are actually not the cheapest. Those are the most expensive because there's nothing like paying money for something that doesn't work.
What do you recommend to your clients?
I like a company called Mountain Peak Nutritionals. That's actually out of Beaverton. They make very high quality supplements and they have a good multivitamin. It's generally only sold through practitioners though. But there are other good companies. You just have to read the ingredients, read the list, look for all of those long chemical names. If you don't see many of those, then you're on the right track. And hopefully you don't see any of them, but you have to pay more. But otherwise, a good whole food vitamin can also be quite beneficial.
Juice Plus.
Hmm?
Do you know companies Juice Plus or Univera?
I'm not familiar with those.
I've tried for years to get them to give me an analysis of what's actually
So-
in it, and they never do.
I think.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
bad.
Juice Plus.
Yeah.
Do you have a
What about
question?
Univera?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that?
Yes,
Okay, I think
I
Paul
use
had a question.
Metagenics. That's my favorite.
Where did you do your work, your studies, graduate from, and how many years have you been in practice?
So
I
I
have a
graduated from National College of Natural Medicine here in town,
Okay.
which has now been renamed the National University of Natural Medicine. And I graduated in 2015, so I haven't been out too long,
Okay.
but I was already much further down this path before I even started in school. And so it's,
And you went for 6 years instead of 4 to take more.
yeah, I actually spread the program out because naturopathic school is very unnaturopathic in what is demanded of you. It's very, very stressful. It is medical school.
Right.
And I see lots of people, I have lots of classmates that came in healthy and went out sick. And that's very common, that lots of them can't even start practicing for a year or more until they actually recover. And that was,
The second question I had was a lot of emphasis on organic production. As I look at that, it's a production process, and what we've seen is a proliferation of very large scale organics. The products they're using are very concentrated. So, how is there a difference? I mean, there's organics and then there's organics. They're not. It's not the same.
There's a huge difference.
There's an industrial model organics and the small farm model organics.
And that brings up a really good point, because we have to be careful of this, because, you know, the big corporations have gotten into this in a big way because we're starting to demand it.
Right.
Wherever we put our money, they want to get it. Yeah. So they change their model or set up structures that, you know, will provide us. So they've done this with organics, and they constantly are trying to undermine the quality of organics and fast track other things that make it really not that organic. So we have to be more diligent. But, you know, companies like Whole Foods, for example, they've been constantly kind of getting in trouble because their organics are being found to not even be organic in many cases, especially the ones they're pulling in from China and other countries. You know, the organic certification is nothing more than lip service. And so this is what's going on with the big corporations that we have to be, we have to pay attention to. And
also, the original Organic Association is infuriated with how things are, what they've become. So they are working really hard. I don't think they've got it quite set up to have a different organic certification that
it's more stringent.
Way more stringent, right? So
and we need that.
The multinational companies can't just come in and call something organic.
Is that TILF, basically?
Is it what?
No.
TILF?
No, TILF is working with them on that. TILF is really good. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
in today's political environment, I don't see that coming.
No.
I think I see it going the other way, but it's the point. The reason I asked the question is there's a difference.
There is a difference, right?
And you really have to be aware and conscious.
And that's why these smaller farms and, growing your own things, those aren't certified organic. And there are lots of really good vegetable producers that aren't organic, but they use
well, they're not certified organic,
right?
But they are still organic. It's just that it costs a lot of money to play this game.
That's right. It's a process.
Farmers can't afford it.
Yeah.
Right.
And so this is where if you follow the money, you always get the answers.
Right.
And so you guys probably or maybe heard about this food labeling bill that was trying to go through. And we were trying to get our food labeled so that if it had genetically modified ingredients in it, it would be on the label. And the majority of people want that. We as consumers, I mean, what consumer do you know wouldn't want to know if there was GMO in it? It's like, it's kind of a no-brainer. And yet, there were so many millions of dollars poured into that campaign to keep GMOs off the label. And that money came from the big corporations to fight this and to keep it off. And it's just not fair, the way this game is being played.
So Vermont was able to keep GMOs out and insist on labeling. And they've just won their court cases to, of course, the big companies really tried to get it back on, but they're still requiring that. So then Campbell's Soup has bought they bought Pacific Foods, which is, an organic food processor.
Right.
So they're wanting to get into organics. And so then they do fudge I'm sure they're going to start trying to fudge. So that's why that other certification. So that certification, I haven't heard that it is about to pass, I think. It's about to come
about. Organic.
Right. Yeah.
Well, there's countries in Europe that won't even buy some of our crops if they're GMO.
Right.
Oh yeah, lots of our crops are like the bottom of the barrel when the rest of the world is concerned.
Well, when Wikipedia first had its disclosures, there were cables where the U.S. government was trying to have their ambassadors force foreign nations to accept GMOs.
Oh, geez.
So, anybody else have a question?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any particular take on Parkinson's?
The question is what?
Parkinson's.
Oh, Parkinson's.
Yeah, I mean it's full of inflammation, just like every other disease. If you are able to reduce the inflammation, you can prevent the onset. Parkinson's comes from damage within the central nervous system, and there's a control center that affects the tremor, and Parkinson's doesn't develop until over 70% of that tissue is damaged.
Yeah, 10
So,
years or so.
Yeah, so
yeah.
the damage has gone on for so long until it gets to that point. But there's a lot that can be done. But all of the people that end up with Parkinson's, they've run out of antioxidants, really. Glutathione levels have dropped a lot, and if you can start working to improve some of that, then sometimes you can really thwart the progression of that disease. And in some cases, if you do everything right, you can potentially even reverse many of the symptoms.
Alan?
Yeah, do you have any, anything to say about Alzheimer's, the slowing it down, prevention and reversing? There's a book called End of Alzheimer's. I forget the author's name, but it seems to be a pretty good book.
Alzheimer's is on an exponential rise, as well as most chronic diseases, and in some circles they're calling it type 3 diabetes. It's another metabolic disease, and almost all chronic diseases have a major metabolic aspect to them. And when I say metabolic, I mean there's cellular malfunction going on with the way that we're utilizing energy and burning fuel. And so, with Alzheimer's, the brain, because guess what? The brain, weight-wise, is only a couple percent of our total body weight. And yet, the amount of energy that our brain uses in our body is like 20 to 25% of our entire body energy requirements. The brain uses tons of energy. It has to burn through tons of fuel to get that energy. So, if you start having a metabolic malfunction, like diabetes is, then the brain tissue is not going to be able to make the fuel or burn the fuel to make the energy. And if that happens, then it no longer can protect itself, repair itself, actually make neurotransmitters like it should, cause transmissions to work like they should. Memory starts going because function drops. And so this is a big reason why it's being referred to in a lot of circles as type 3 diabetes.
There was also a book written by a doctor whose husband had Alzheimer's, and she, through research, whatever, started giving him 2 tablespoons of virgin coconut oil, and it reversed it. Coconut oil.
Oh, okay.
2 tablespoons a day, and it reversed it.
Yeah, coconut oil is great for Alzheimer's and for all people that have metabolic dysfunction, because coconut oil is about half medium chain triglycerides. Medium chain triglycerides are burned in the body much more easily than long chain fatty acids. And so medium chain, they bypass a lot of the absorption process, no energy required, they just go right in and you're able to use them for energy really quick. So if you have diabetes, if you have Alzheimer's, you're not burning your fuel well, coconut oil and medium chain triglycerides can really bypass and give a boost to the whole system and provide the energy that you're missing, and that can restore lots of brain function.
So you've heard of MCT oil?
No.
Oh, that's medium chain triglyceride oil. So you can just get it. So we always take it with whole coconut oil anyway, just to get that whole food in there, so you get all that information.
So you're buying the oil separately?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you can't get the oil separately.
MCT is
Yep.
what's that stand?
Where do you
Medium
buy it?
chain triglycerides.
Natural grocers, and
Okay.
most any place has it, I think.
MCT oil.
Yeah, natural grocers has pretty good quality.
So I have a question. So could you say a little bit about what your personal process was? You said that you had a lot of damage to your body and that you've used foods to heal that.
Mhm.
Can you tell what your process was to work through the food selection that allowed you to do that?
Oh wow, this was a lot of trial and error. I had to do a lot of it on my own because of financial aspects early on. But there are other options that can fast track that, which I use as a doctor at this point, which are food sensitivity panels. And I don't know if you guys have heard of any of those, but they're not foolproof. They're not 100% perfect, but they're very fast and effective for getting a good idea. So it's just a little finger prick test, and you drop a few drops of blood on a card, and then send that into the lab, and they analyze. Usually, the base analysis is 96 different common foods, and they give you an immunoglobulin. So immunoglobulins are a big part of your immune system, and that's when you're reactive to certain components in your body, whether it be food or bacteria or viruses or whatever, you make immunoglobulins. And so if you have a lot of immunoglobulins to certain substances, then you have a lot of reactivity. And it would be good to remove, if it's a food, remove that food. And so this test tests the level of immunoglobulins to each of those specific foods. So like I said, it's not foolproof, but it gives a really good idea. And that's a test that I use quite frequently.
And what is it called?
It's a food sensitivity test, or
So
like
when
a
you get those
96
out,
food.
those irritating things, then you get way less inflammation. And it's funny, a lot of times it's something you crave, like cheese or the whole nightshade realm of eggplant, peppers, tomatoes, and it can be anything almost. But once you get that out, that's your beginning really.
So the gold standard though is to use a food elimination program. And many of you may have heard of that, but that's where you eliminate most of the major food offenders that are known, like dairy and wheat, gluten, grains, nightshades. You just eliminate most of that, and you end up on a really bland, basic diet. And as long as you feel okay with that, then you start adding in one food every few days. And as soon as you notice some issues, you journal all this, and you're like, oh, that's a food that doesn't agree with me. And then you drop it back out, see if you start feeling better again. Then you add other foods back in, and you just keep track of all of that. So it's pretty labor intensive, but it's very accurate. So, and you can do it on your own.
But what I've noticed anyway, is I don't have a reaction within instantly 1 day, 3 days. It might be 2 weeks later. So it's really hard.
And that is true with a lot of
that's
food
just really hard
reactions.
you thought you were good.
So is it better just to go ahead and have the screening down?
That's a good
The screening is much easier, and it can help focus a little bit faster. If there's any foods that are really reactive, that are really lighten you up, so to speak, then you just take those out at least, see if you feel better. And in many cases, you will reduce the reactivity in your body, and by doing that, you're reducing the inflammation. Reducing the inflammation frees up more energy, and then you're able to start repairing a lot of your tissues that you hadn't been able to before, and you're usually able to start feeling a little bit better.
Oh, and then a lot of times after you've gone through all that and you're down feeling really good, those foods that bothered you, probably you were eating the wrong form of that food. So
Can you
cheese.
give me an example? Yeah, give me
Yeah,
an example.
so like you're eating cheese. Oh, yum, Tillamook cheese curds or something. Well, you realize you need to have raw, organic cheese, naturally fermented. Then you don't have any issues at all. So pasteurization kills almost, everything about.
And it
all
alters
your
the form of the calcium in the dairy
Well,
and makes
the,
it
the
so it's
process
not as
applies heat.
yeah.
Right.
It kills all the enzymes.
Right.
And it alters the structure of the calcium and makes it less absorbable as well and less usable. So you're actually able to get a lot more beneficial calcium out of leafy greens than you do out of most conventional dairy, believe it or not.
Okay, well, we're out of time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.